there were even times where I was like, I just don't care. And, those times are really the times that are disturbing. Scary when you're like, I just don't care right now. I don't care anymore. Where do you go from there? That's pretty much headed down the hill. Getting too close to burnout for comfort and just need to sort of back away from that cliff. My blood pressure and never had real trouble with my weight, but certainly wasn't in a good place or as good a place as it could. So I got laid off right there on the spot. That was really a joyful relief. Within an hour, I sort of felt and realized like, hey, this is the best thing that's happened to me. It's like the pressures of modern life are just a mismatch. Everyone talks about sort of the midlife crisis and how it's a cliche that, the midlife crisis, you'd go out and buy a sports car or whatever. I got a bright fire engine red Mazda 3. But then it's like my standard response was midlife crisis. This is midlife awesomeness. I don't want people to get to the point where they feel like they have to walk away from a 30-year career in order to figure out what they're doing and get healthy again.
There's a moment that hits a lot of men in midlife when your body starts pushing back. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to make you wonder, is this just age? Or is there something going on with my health? You're still doing all the right things, still providing, still pushing, still working hard and chasing goals. But something feels off. Today's conversation is for the man who's starting to feel that quiet tension. The one who's too close to burnout. The one who's been told that it's just a midlife crisis and to laugh it off. Today, my guest, Ramsey, brings a grounded, honest perspective on what's really happening beneath the surface for men in this season of life. This isn't about hacks. It's about finding alignment and listening to the whispers before they turn into screams. Don't wait until a crisis hits. Your health, happiness, and longevity are your responsibility. Nobody else is coming to save you. Midlife is a time to stop making excuses and to take ownership of your life before it's too late.
I'm a husband and father and a believer, a Christian. Um, live in Washington State in America. And my kids are in their 20s. So they're, college age, or my daughter just graduated. And I'm a business owner. I've been in, the professional world for, basically all of my adult life and just trying to do all the right things. That's not always easy, but always trying to do the right things.
Yeah, nice, mate. If we rewind a few years before the kids got to university and all these things were happening, what can you tell us about maybe the early parts of your career and earlier parts of your adult life?
Yeah. So I was in the sustainable energy industry for, most of my adult life. Things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, solar power, green building, that kind of stuff. Got into that, during college and right after college, and was working for nonprofits for a decade or so, and eventually went to business school and got an MBA in the evenings. And I like to say that I took business as a foreign language because I was very much into sort of the environmental side of it. So got into sustainable business for a long time. And was doing that for many years. Got married, had kids, moved out west, out here to Washington State, and just really enjoyed being out here. And we were in Michigan for a number of years. Grew up in on the East Coast in Virginia. So
Mm.
yeah.
When you were working in that sustainable energy sort of field, what do you think was driving you? What were the values? What was the motivation? What was the purpose?
Yeah. Well, I've always been really mission driven in my life and in my professional world. And, just learned early on in school that the way that the world was going in terms of the environment and resources just wasn't a sustainable path, and that there were so many things that we could be doing differently. The first thing that we sort of got into, that I got into, was green building design. So designing, building buildings, homes, or commercial buildings that used a lot less energy and used natural daylighting and had much better indoor air quality. So there was an aspect of health in that, and an aspect of resource use and resource protection. But it was always finding ways to work with professionals to do a better job for the environment, but also do it in a cost-effective way, and a way to, really create designs and buildings that were good, just as good or better than the typical ones. So always had a sort of mission driven aspect to, make the world a better place. When I was young and naive, I set out to save the world, and after I'd done that for a while, I realized that I couldn't save the world by myself. And so then I looked for other people to work with to save the world, and then I realized that even working with those other people, we weren't going to save the world, but at least we could, try to make the world a better place. And then, the years kept going, and we had some success, but I also got, jaded in a lot of ways, because it seemed like we were doing all the things, but the world continued to get more strange and interesting in new and strange and interesting ways. And my career was 30 years in the sustainable energy business. And it was very satisfying in the sense that the kinds of things that we started promoting back in the mid 90s have really become sort of commonplace. They've become uh, the default setting. They're baked into the way that people design and build buildings. So that's really gratifying. But eventually it was kind of like, well, uh, we've sort of accomplished all the things that we set out early on to promote, and then it's looking at what needs to happen next. And in many ways, eventually felt like the industry sort of didn't need me anymore, and maybe I ought to do something else.
As you're going through that career, like, were you pretty fulfilled with that job? And did it get to a point where, I don't know, it sounded like you started to question it, like, do I still belong here?
It was very fulfilling, for a time. Um, And the most fulfilling aspects and times were when I was really making an impact, when I was making a difference, when I was leading teams. So when I had people on my team who we were working together to, do great things and build things. I really love to build things, whether we're talking about, actual structures, or whether we're talking about software systems, or whether we're talking about groups of people. Just love to build stuff. Um, but at one point, I got passed over for a promotion, and I wasn't really smart enough to realize. I didn't have the perspective at that time in my career to realize that I really should have started looking for other things when that happened.
Mhm.
But instead, I just kept my nose down, and kept trying to build things, and I kept helping a lot of people out, and eventually kind of worked myself out of a job.
Hmm.
And from there, it was sort of hopping from one opportunity to the next, but it seemed like each hop that I took was in some ways settling for something else, and it was less of a match with what I could really do and be effective and really make a difference. And that's when, I found things to be sort of less satisfying and fulfilling.
Hmm. Hmm. So at that point in your career, there was this question of what's next. It sounds like you were hopping around looking for different opportunities. What was going through your mind then? And, what happened after that?
Well, when I was hopping around between opportunities, what was going through my mind is, uh, really trying to, in some ways, get back into a groove. And in some ways, looking for safety and looking for, uh, trying to get back something that I lost. And in retrospect, I don't think that that was the best mindset. It wasn't that I was moving out of a position of power or a position of strength, but instead I was making those hops out of more of a position of lack of self confidence. And, it's really tough. Even though my resume was getting built and had been built and strong, uh, I was sort of losing position. I was sort of losing prominence, and I wasn't doing myself a lot of favors by the way that I was doing that. I also was finding jobs where I could build things and sort of keep my head down,
Mm,
which was fun and great, except that I was not building networks. Like I wasn't doing as good a job reaching out to people, and I wasn't doing as good of a job staying in touch with my colleagues and my old friends. So in retrospect, that really kind of set me back because I wasn't maintaining that strength or building that strength of connections, which could have done a much better job of kind of building my career instead of just finding, the next something that I could plug into.
mm. Were you comfortable at that time? Were you feeling like, the work is just comfortable. I'm just on autopilot. I can sort of cruise. I don't want to push myself too hard. Or you talk a little bit about safety there and, obviously wanting to find safety. Do you feel you're playing it safe at that time?
There were a couple times where I either got laid off or, needed, it was clear that I needed to get a different position. And once I did get those new positions, then I was looking for a position of safety again. In the sense
Mm,
that when I got that new job, I was like, okay, like sigh of relief, I've got the new job now. Now I can just, you know, lock in and do my job and do the work. Um, and when I did that, when I found those positions, um, they were good for a while. But what I was not doing was being really smart about looking at the long run, looking at the long term, and getting back on mission. So my mission, uh, each time I took a new position, it got a little bit further away from my mission, and
mm,
then it got to the point where I was also sort of having mission drift, and eventually, it got to the point where I was like, I don't think I know what my mission is anymore. And then once you get to that place and you're not really sure about what your purpose is or where you want to go next, then that makes it really hard to convince anybody that they really ought to hire you or that you're the guy or that you're the
mm.
one that would be best suited to do the next thing for them if you're not even really sure, convinced what that next thing ought to be.
Yeah. Sounds like a loss of alignment, mate, or you weren't really in line with, what was important to you. There was no purpose. There was no mission. Yeah, just starting to question those things. Before we dive into like you finding a new mission or, taking the next step there, I'm curious, like, how were you mentally, emotionally at that time?
Not great, probably worse and worse.
Mm,
um, I think a lot of my, self-worth and confidence, like a lot of guys, was wrapped up in what I was sort of doing professionally.
mm,
And I certainly have a strong sense of who I am as a person and who I am, within my family and, within, my faith community and that kind of stuff. But still, a huge part of that is wrapped up in what you're doing professionally and certainly for myself too. And I think that the fact that that was slipping was also leading to me not wanting to talk to people as much, because they always ask you, "Oh, how's it going? How you doing? What do you do?" And
Mm,
certainly like when you find yourself in a stretch of unemployment, like you don't want to talk to somebody because they're going to ask you, "Oh, so what are you doing? What do you do?" And your answer is nothing. I'm
yeah.
looking for something to do. I don't know
Mm,
what I'm doing. I don't have anything to do now. And that
mm,
just that's a blow. Like that really kind of knocks you down. And then this was also sort of getting into around 2020, and the world was just being a very strange place around
mm,
2020 and the years leading up to it and the years right after it too. So uh, connecting with people certainly got a lot more difficult during that period in terms of meeting people in person. But then it also sort of got strange because people took sides in a lot of ways. And uh, in a lot of ways, I found myself either real or imagined on opposite sides of big issues from old friends and even from family members. And not even having the knowledge or confidence to even know necessarily who was on which side. And it was just safer to just not say anything.
mm,
And, that is just not a healthy and productive place. I don't think the world was in a healthy place during that
mm.
time, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment called Into the Wild, and he talks about how men need to be in the fight. Is the way he describes it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, having that career or having that purpose, something to strive for, something to focus on. And it's not like we want to use that to drown out, our relationships, our connection, our health, and all the other things that are important. But as a man, we like to, have purpose and have drive and have something that we're building or working towards, which it sounds like you were doing earlier in your career. But sort of as it went on, you're starting to drift and starting to ask those sort of powerful questions. How was that affecting the rest of your life? So you talked a little bit about maybe some disconnection there, not wanting to talk to people and feeling, like, am I good enough, or am I, because I'm not doing something, am I worthy? But how was that with, your relationship with your partner? How was that with your health? How was that in terms of like, lifestyle and freedom, purpose and legacy for you?
Yeah. Um, Definitely put a strain on my relationships, including my marriage. Um, so my wife and I, we got married young. We met and got together in college, and we got married about a year out of college. And then we went to grad school. So we actually waited quite a few years before we started having kids. But when we were sort of uh, young and college age, we had very sort of matching ideas and ideals. We, saw things very much the same. But then, as many people do, you grow up and you spend years and decades of your life, and you have different experiences and get different perspectives around things. And I think in many ways, she and I got sort of different perspectives around a lot of things, and that definitely uh, made things difficult. And so,
Mm,
also uh, having times of being unemployed puts a real financial strain. Um, my wife is very much a professional, and she has had great jobs her life, and would not want it any other way. That is very much who she is. She's a leader, a professional leader. Um, but during the times when we sort of became a one salary household, that puts a financial strain on things. And then also, whenever I sort of got to times or places in my life where I was drifting, not knowing who I was or what I wanted to do, I think that gets frustrating and challenging for her because, if I don't know, then she certainly doesn't know. um, and then in terms of, relationships with my friends, I had a really strong group of friends in high school and college. And then I moved away and then moved away again. So a lot of distance between us and them. But then also during times when I didn't really feel good about myself or feel like I knew what I was doing, then I had, less, I put in less effort to keep up those relationships and
Mm,
then would sort of wonder what they thought about me for a variety of reasons.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it was kind of a wilderness, and it definitely impacted my health in the sense that I wasn't taking great care of myself, not um, eating the best food, not always getting out and getting exercise, and not always getting as much fresh air and sunlight as we really ought to get. And so, things like my blood pressure and never had real trouble with my weight, but certainly wasn't in a good place or as good a place as it could. So, all of those things sort of tend to get wrapped up and kind of go downhill in
mm,
the same direction.
mm. It sounds like there's a lot going on and there's this like spiral pulling you down, with the in and out of work, not feeling, fulfillment from work, being unemployed at certain points, and then obviously the disconnection from maybe a little bit from your mates and from your partner and all those sort of things. Would you say you were depressed at that time or what was going on for you mentally?
Yeah, I do. I get. Hmm. I definitely get depressed sometimes. I've never uh, been diagnosed with anything and never wanted to be.
Mm,
So never went into counseling to the extent that I would ever get any kind of diagnosis. But if I look back, there are certain times in my life where I'm really enthusiastic and feeling good and doing lots of stuff. And then there's times in my life where I'm just like dragging and don't want to do anything. And uh, uh, even there were even times where I was like, I just don't care about what's going on. And, those times are really the times that are disturbing for those of us who know and understand that when things are good, that we really want, that we care about things, that we want to accomplish things, that we know that we want to do the best for ourselves and for others. And it's scary when you're like, I just don't care right now. I don't care anymore. Cause you're like, okay, where do you go from there? That's pretty much headed down the hill.
mm. Yeah, yeah. We can lose our way, can't we, in that sort of sense? And if a lot is going against us right now, or we feel like the world is heavy, it can be hard to dig our way out of that hole, or just find that mission or that purpose or that clarity in the direction we want to go. So when you're going through this and it's about 2020 and the world's a bit crazy and everything's going on, what was the bump? What was the point where things started to turn for you, or you started to find again maybe a mission or a sense of direction?
Yeah. Well, I went through and did a couple of really great men's group through our church. And they were really helpful for a number of reasons. The camaraderie between the guys was really strong, and the taking a look at who I was and trying to again sort of discover what my identity is. And I was able to, and just to reconnect with God in ways that, I've been a believer since about 2000. So, in my adult life. Uh, but certainly times over the course of that would sort of ebb and flow. And in sort of the worst of it, I was definitely not strongly connected. But The identity that I got from God was beloved son, ready and prepared.
Mm.
And that was really a joyful relief to sort of learn that that's what, and understand that that's what God sees me as, beloved. And this notion of ready and prepared, like, what does that even mean? Right. And so, and why do you need both? Ready in the sense that being aware and awake and looking around and having situational awareness. That was sort of what that ready was. And then prepared, having gone through some things and having wandered in the wilderness for a while, and sort of getting ready for that. And then um, I guess it was more like 2024, by the time that things really sort of uh, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. uh, in sort of late 2023, I got a word from God that 2024 was going to be a year of trials for me. And at that time, I was employed. Um, some things at work were just being very sketchy and sort of nuts. And then some friends of mine reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to do this thing called Exodus 90? And I was like, well, what is that? And it's this great, uh, it's this great experience that we Catholics do. And it's all about Stoicism. And we do really fun things like take cold showers and not eat candy and, not have dessert and fast on certain days. And at first I was like, wait, what now? Like, why would you do that? And what's the purpose of that? But then they sort of kept asking me, and I really prayed about it. And God basically told me, you need to do this because it's your boot camp for 2024, which is going to be a year of trials for you. And you need to become spiritually, physically, mentally harder than you are
Yeah.
now in order to deal with what's coming next year. And I was like, okay. So I entered into this experience. It was January, February, March of 2024. And during that time, I think it was late February, I caught a meeting with my boss's boss and I didn't see it coming, but I got laid off right there on the spot,
Mm.
again. And I had only been in that job less than a year. But within an hour, I sort of felt and realized like, hey, this is the best thing that's happened to me in a while. Because I have now been officially relieved of all professional responsibilities. And I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm sure that I wasn't supposed to be doing what I was doing before.
Mm.
And that was the time and the moment where I could really take a look and do a hard career reboot. So I started asking myself the question, what's worthwhile? What is it that I think is important? What is important to me? What do I need to do next? And the only thing I was excited about doing at that time was starting a podcast. I had done a podcast in a previous position. And so I was familiar with the mechanics and I knew it was fun. So I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to ask this question, what's worthwhile as a podcast? And I'm going to start from there and I'm going to just explore my interests and try to figure out what is the next thing that I ought to do.
Mm. I love that. There's a lot you said there that I'd like to unpack a little bit more, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of inner work or a lot of exploring there. You've joined the men's group. You're getting more involved in your faith. You've got yourself like this intention that's come up about beloved, be ready, be prepared. Um, had you done any of this sort of pausing and questioning in the earliest stage of your life? Did you know your values? Did you know goals, directions, where you were heading? Did you know the man or the identity that you were? Or is this the first time that you'd put the brakes on and actually started to ask some of these questions?
I probably did versions of this once or twice previously, but certainly not to this extent. And I think that maybe you need to do it a few times over the course of your life because the man that I was the man that I had just become in college became another man or a deeper version once I got married and started having kids. And then I was a different person as the kids were functioning, kids running around and growing up. And then when they went to high school, and then especially when they went to college and started
Mm,
leaving the house, then that's a whole different chapter. So I do think that over the course of, for someone who is married and has kids, the where the kids are in that evolution, that one has a big impact. And so how we see the world changes a lot based on the stage of where our family is. I think that's a big one.
mm, mm,
But then also another big one was kind of what was happening um, in my career, and also what was happening with the world politically, and the environmentalism. That is certainly a big thing, but then there's also lots of other things that have been happening in the world that I'm very attuned to. Uh, and they were definitely impacting me powerfully. It's always about, for me, it's like, how can I contribute to the greater good and what is the need for that? Um, and then also just, my faith journey.
mm,
Uh, I didn't have a sense of faith when I was younger, when I was a kid. And then, sort of came to faith in my early adulthood. And that faith got tested and expanded in a number of ways and different times and ebbed and flowed. So, yeah, I think I did a fair amount of self reflection over the years, but the ideas about myself and about the world kind of changed over time, a couple of times.
mm. Yeah, I think you're right. As we go through those different chapters of our life and the responsibilities that we have, definitely things shift. Our values shift. Our time and energy shifts. There's a lot, for us guys that's going on hormonally, especially in midlife as well. So many shifts happening, and it can be like that loss of identity or starting to question, you know, geez, is my health declining? Is my strength declining? I'm not the man I used to be. Who is the man I'm becoming? So I think, a lot of times we hear about this as the midlife crisis, but it's really a turning point and stepping into a new chapter. And it sounds like that's what you were going through, at this point in your life. What was the identity shift? What was happening for you? What was the new path that, was speaking to you or calling you?
Well, it's funny. Everyone talks about sort of the midlife crisis and how it's a cliche that, the midlife crisis, you'd go out and buy a sports car or whatever. Um, right around this time, I got a bright fire engine red Mazda 3, um, which is as close as I'm going to get to a sports car, I think. But then it's like, my standard response was, midlife crisis. This is midlife awesomeness. Like, I've got a fun new car to drive. There was a point right around that same time where I started taking vitamins, and, and it started with iodine. So taking, pure iodine. And if you've never had or I should say, if you've had an iodine deficiency kind of your whole life, something that happens is that the first week that you take it, you get these like cold and flu, like stuffy nose kind of symptoms. And that's the iodine pushing the fluoride out of your system. And I definitely had that. And it was funny because after a week, those symptoms stopped. And then within 2 or 3 weeks, I just felt like amazing
Mm,
and started going to the gym and started running and just having the energy to do that. And then I was like, huh, well, that was only one supplement. I think I should try a bunch more supplements. So started taking a bunch more vitamins and then getting really into jogging and running. I had used to only run if I was chasing a soccer ball or if I was preparing to chase a soccer ball. But then I managed to acquire an interest and love of running just for itself.
mm,
And that was really good and working out at the gym. So I think my fitness definitely got better. My fitness was probably better in my 40s than it was in my 30s because I sort of turned that corner and stopped eating, fast food at lunch every workday, which, you know, bad idea. Um, so that had a lot to do with that was a good sort of stronger turning point. Um, but in terms of this difference in identity or difference in priority, uh, had a lot to do with health and personal health and community health. I'd always been engaged in sustainability of the environment and environmental systems, and I still believe
mm,
in that. But by the time 2020 rolled around, I became more concerned with the sustainability of human health and was just really taken aback and just blown away during the COVID era, uh, how folks who had, 3 or 4 comorbidities just fared so much worse than those who were in generally good health. And I was really offended by the idea that the best that we could do was to find our solutions to that health crisis in a needle or in masks or
mm,
in stay home and isolate and don't go outside and don't go to the playground and don't go to the beach because my brain just couldn't process how those things were the best thing for human health. And that really got me thinking about how can we just build our base of health and wellness and how can we not get sick and how can we get better quickly when we do get sick. And that really brought me around. So while I was doing this whole journey of asking what's worthwhile, kind of the answer that I came up with is mind, body, and spirit wellness. I was always sort of really interested in the connections between mind, body, and spirit that has to do with my faith and just my own experience and all that stuff. And just looking at holistically how we as individual people could reclaim that health. And I wanted to reclaim it for myself, but I also wanted to help others and uh, see ways that we as societies can get more healthy, get more interconnected instead of either isolating and staying at home by ourselves or worse yet, fighting with each other all the time. Just the level of rancor between people who think differently or felt differently about political issues and health issues from the era of the 2015 through 2025, the last 10 years, just the amount of uh, to the extent that we can't talk about things, we can't talk about politics, we can't talk about health. And since when and why should health be a political issue, anyways?
Mm,
Why and how and what universe are we where it's controversial that we should take good care of our individual health? Like, why does that even make sense? So I really sort of dug into those issues and tried to find a way to use my voice, find my voice, and use my voice to uh, figure out what the right things are and do the right things and start having conversations about it.
Mm. I can see like health is important to you, mate. We mentioned it earlier in the episode or when we started talking, health was there. And obviously with the environmental, it's a sustainability, the health of the world, the health of the environment. And it sounds like, you know, you've connected to that realization that health is a value and you're putting more time and energy towards that. I was reading the other day about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett was asked to go to a college graduation and to do a speech. And he was up there in front of, you know, all the students who are graduating. And he's talking about, you know, himself at that age. And, you know, the two things he was most interested in that age was cars and girls. And he was saying that, you know, he had this dream about this genie coming to him and saying to him that he could have any car, whatever car he wanted, he could have. And tomorrow that car would arrive. And he was like, oh, that sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? And the genie said to him, the car that you get is the only car you will have for the rest of your life. So you choose the car wisely. Okay, what is the car that you want? And you're only going to get that one car for the rest of your life. So in his mind, he's like, well, if I only get that car, like I'm going to take care of it. Like I'm going to polish it. It's going to be in the garage. I'm going to look after it. I'm going to get it serviced more than it needs to be serviced. If it's the only car I've got to make sure I look after it because it's got to last me a lifetime. And he reflects and says, well, that's my body. That's the car is me. You've got one home, you've got one body. And are you taking care of it the best way you possibly can? Because in the years ahead, there's going to be challenges that it's going to come up and it's going to be easy not to take care of the car, to overlook the car. But if it's the only one you've got, what happens when it breaks down? And I thought that was quite a good reflection on where we're at with our health. And because you mentioned that you bought yourself a little Mazda, I was like, well, there's a good analogy. Right there, mate. So it sounds like, you know, you've put a lot more into your health and you've gone down that line of, you know, starting to look not only at your own health, but how you can help other people with their health as well. How did that lead into what you're doing now? Like you talked about the podcast coming up, but what's the future? Where are you heading?
Yeah. Well, I love talking about really big picture issues and thinking about all this stuff, and just on the podcast have had the chance to have really interesting conversations with people from all different directions and talking to lots of practitioners who do things. But, you know, at some point I should probably start earning a living again. Like, I think my wife would appreciate that. And so in 2024, I entered into a 12-month nutritional therapy practitioner program, which I graduated from in September. And I thought to myself, I love all this big picture stuff, but I need to find something that is far more practical and hands-on and specific that I can really make an impact on. And again, I just love to build stuff. And so I went through this NTP program, and what that focuses on is promoting and working with people and helping them with a number of things, specifically nutrient dense whole foods. So eating the right things, and you know, there's a million different ways to eat, but specifically eating, you know, real food and dodging ultra processed food as much as possible. Having effective digestion, so you know, eating the types of foods and at the types of times that work well with your own sort of constitution. People are all different, and people respond to different things in different ways. And also having smooth blood sugar regulation, which is a huge issue for me because I was diagnosed, you know, as a child with hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. But going through the program, I realized that it wasn't just that it's low blood sugar, it's all the time. It's just that I was just not good at keeping my blood sugar steady. And a lot of people deal with that. And then also daily movement and exercise. So getting up and off the chair, whether it's to do big workouts or just to take walks, really important. Another one is managing stress effectively. And that's a huge one just because the world that we live in today is packed with mental, emotional, and virtual stressors instead of the physical challenges that our bodies were designed for or evolved for. And so the innate stress response is whack for what we deal with kind of now all the time. And then finally, sleep. So finding ways to get high quality, sufficient sleep. So basically, those 5 or 6 items are in the wheelhouse of a nutritional therapy practitioner, the NTP program that I went through. And what appeals to me about all of those is that they're just so practical. There's no rocket science involved with any of that stuff. And yet, if you're sitting here and you're listening and you hear me tick off that list, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, not that great at that. Yeah, no, don't really have time for that. Yeah, not really doing that. It's like the pressures of modern life are just a mismatch for what our bodies did, pre-industrial revolution for the previous however many thousands or hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years or however long it's been that people have been around and doing stuff. And so I think I've basically have come to the conclusion that it's this modern lifestyle that we have that I've had my whole life. And I'm sure lots of guys have and people have that is just a mismatch for really how to have good, natural, holistic health. And meanwhile, I've been learning that Western medicine is, it's called allopathic medicine. It's like medicine that's based on diagnoses and chemicals and procedures is not the only way that people have been supporting their health on this planet for millennia. It's not necessarily the best way. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to become a doctor, but I definitely understood why in the COVID era, I was just rattled and shaking my head going, there's got to be something else. And there is, there's a lot of somethings else. So so the podcast certainly is providing just a lot of content around those areas. While I was still in school, I wrote a book about the stress response, and specifically it's a how-to book on how to respond differently than your innate stress response, and have developed and am launching uh, a set of services for guys that are experiencing what I did, getting too close to burnout for comfort and just need to sort of back away from that cliff. And there's absolutely ways to do it. And we need to do it because, I don't want people to get to the point where they feel like they have to walk away from a 30-year career in order to figure out what they're doing and get healthy again. It would be far better to get better before burnout sets in.
I align with exactly what you're saying. It's that preventative health, not waiting until the wheels fall off the car before we actually take it to the mechanic and get serviced. It's
Yeah.
Stepping up to the plate and making sure we're taking care of ourselves. Ramsey, when I hear you talk about this stuff, I can feel the energy. Early in the podcast when you were talking about your job, you were walking through those steps, but there wasn't much drive and motivation there. But now when I hear you talk about your health, I hear you talk about nutrition, I hear you talk about the pillars that you touched on there. There's a lot more energy in the way you feel. And there's two parts to this question. Like the first part is probably the obvious part. It's like, how do you feel now? You're talking about the podcast and it brings you energy, like with what's going on for you in your life and the purpose that you've found, how is that making you feel? And I think that's the question people would expect me to ask right here. So I'm going to flip that as well, because I also feel there's probably still some uncertainty there, and the safety and the security around the other side is that too. So I want to hear the positives, but I also want to hear maybe the struggles or the negatives or the things that might be still playing on your mind as you move into this, new purpose and direction that you're following.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Um, the purpose that I'm finding now is to reach out and to connect with people who feel much the same way, and to uh, just to help and rebuild, work with them to rebuild their health. And at the same time, I'm still struggling with my own self confidence. The pieces of me that are shy about putting myself out there, or you know, uh, wondering what people are going to think of me. Like that's still there. That doesn't. I don't think that goes away. I don't know if that'll ever go away. But it it gets for me, it gets to motivation. It gets to, I think the two great motivators are fear and love. And so when you're in a place of fear, it might motivate you to do things, to run away or to fight or to do that thing or to finally get around to that thing you've been putting off. But fear will also lead to inaction. It will make you cautious and prevent you from stepping up and stepping out. Whereas I think that love as a motivator, love for yourself, love for your community, love for your family, love for your brother, that will motivate you to action far more often. And perhaps you still won't know what the best or right thing is. And maybe you won't make the best decision, but if you make decisions based on love, then I do believe that we will have a much greater chance of success. And if things do go sideways, then we're able to just say, you know what, I blew it. I'm sorry. I was trying to do this thing and these are why I was doing it. And you're going to find that there's a lot more forgiveness there, forgiveness for self and forgiveness from others when you do make mistakes, when you're doing things based out of love. And so, when I look back and think about the times that I was operating mostly out of fear, that's a dark place. And I imagine a lot of people are in that place. And it takes courage. It takes courage to act despite fear. But when you sort of lean into and grasp and think about and focus on the things that you love, then that courage, I think, comes a lot more easily. And that's what I'm finding. And that's what I'm definitely still working through. But I'm really excited about this year coming up. I feel like I've got kind of all the pieces in place and I'm ready to just get out there and do stuff.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I think, firstly, I think imposter syndrome is normal. And if we're not feeling imposter syndrome, then we're not putting ourselves out there. Like, we want to always be on that edge of feeling like, do I belong here? And I think that drives us to learn more, to know our craft, to have that motivation and that passion for where we're at. So I'm
And
always
if you
telling
don't
guys,
have if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're probably an actual imposter.
yeah, exactly that. Or you're probably just too comfortable. Like, you're stuck in
Yeah.
those ways. The other thing that popped up, I like that analogy of what you got there. You're talking about fear and you're talking about love and how that can help us, and not living from a place of fear. There's a lot of fear out there. I think a big fear is fear of failure. I think a lot of guys are scared to fail because of how it might betray them. I think, especially after midlife, I should have life figured out by now. I'm not going to fail. But without failure, how can we have growth? If we're going to stay stuck and we're not willing to make experiments, and we're not willing to risk failure, how are we going to grow? So I'm curious, like, how are you around that fear of failure, and what has allowed you to maybe comfortably approach that? Because you've had a big shift. You've walked away from a very successful career, 30 plus years in working sustainability, to now follow a passion and a purpose around, health and well-being. there's got to be fear there, and there's got to be a lot of failure along the way. So what have you found has allowed you to work through that?
Well, in some ways, I feel like I already failed enough times, and maybe I'm due for a win.
Yeah. Yep.
um, and I also feel like I don't have a lot left to lose in the sense that um, I already sort of went through the times and the expressions and the feelings. Like I've been over the course of the last almost 2 years now, uh, putting things out there. Podcasting is a lot like shouting into the wind or putting messages in a bottle and tossing it into the ocean. And I've done that enough times now, and uh, haven't had any horrible repercussions.
Yeah.
And I've had some success. I've had several of my old friends this year have been like, "Oh, like I ran across your podcast. It came across my social media feed, and I just wanted to get back in touch with you and let you know, like, it was cool, it was good, and that just made me feel great. It's like, oh well, it only took 119 bottles into the ocean for to get this positive response. But hey, if that's all it takes. Uh, and so getting through it, getting used to it, and then also, you know, having and taking the time to go through the educational program and going through the whole process of writing and publishing a book and going through the process of getting all my materials ready for this 12-week Better Before Burnout journey that
Mm.
I'm curating for guys. Having done all of that work in addition to doing the work for myself and just feeling good about it, feeling like it's ready to go out there. And I guess it just takes a certain amount of time to work through that fear, and one sort of step at a time. And you push the rock uphill long enough, I guess you get to the summit and, can sort of start pushing it over the other side or down around or who knows where.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's that experiment, isn't it? We're constantly trying to experiment and see what works, especially when we own our own business. And having that courage, you mentioned already, having that courage to experiment and to fail and to learn from those mistakes so that we can, show up next time, with a better understanding, with more growth, with more knowledge, and hopefully continue to walk that path forward. If you could give your younger self some advice now with the wisdom and the knowledge that you do have, what advice would you share?
uh, I would tell myself to just really reach out to people more, reach out more often, um, never take a relationship for granted, and just have the courage to show up and speak out and ask questions and say what you really think. Um, and not fall back and be safe and not think that it's okay to let things go, not think that it's okay to just put your head down and do your work. It's really important to put your head down and do your work and get your work done, but that's not all that there is. And I sort of let myself just be a builder and not be a networker and not be out there connecting with other people. And that definitely cost me. It put me into isolation from a sort of social perspective, and it did not do my career any favors. And now I realize that I have a lot to offer. I've always had a lot to offer. And why shouldn't I make those offers? And not everyone is going to be interested in what I have to offer, but you know, that's okay. They can accept someone else's offer. But meanwhile, I'm going to, I intend to put myself out there a whole lot more in this coming year of 2026.
Mm. Such an important message. I think, especially for a lot of guys, as we get older, it's so easy to lose. our mates. So easy to lose the connection that we have. We go to work and we've got those colleagues, but there's sort of work colleagues. They're not deep, meaningful conversations. Yeah, okay, we're talking about work, but what's going on in your life? How are you feeling? What's the challenges right now? Like, a lot of that stuff doesn't come up, does it, in our workplace? It's not encouraged, obviously, but men need that connection. And then we've got our partner and maybe our direct family, but I think there's even times where blokes just need to talk to blokes, and we need to connect, and we need to have the ability to bounce off these ideas or the struggles we're going through, and to hear that other men are going through those struggles as well. And Ramsey, you've done a great job of sharing the journey that you've been on, and some of the struggles you've faced along the way. What are you doing now around networks? So just like, are you putting you talk about putting yourself out more. Obviously, you've got the podcast and you're connecting with, the guests that you're talking to. What other aspects of your life have changed when you've realized how important relationships and connection is?
Yeah. Well, these past few years, I've gotten a lot more connected at church. So, with other people in that area, also have gotten through the NTP program that I was at the Nutritional Therapy Association, just really trying to connect with fellow students and with the teachers. And then there's an alumni network for that group too. So have been really trying to get connected in through that. I'm trying to use social media in a productive way. Like, I just have never really enjoyed or wanted to enjoy social media. It just, I guess guys maybe of our generation, we didn't grow up with it. And I think a lot of us just still kind of shake our heads and be like, how's this work? And, I'm lucky if I use two thumbs to do stuff. It's usually the forefinger that's like tapping on my phone. And, I just, that doesn't come naturally to me, but I am trying to start putting more content out there and really trying to connect with people more and in a productive way, not in a I'm going to flame you, you're going to flame me, and we're going to score points on each other. And we're not going to, dunk on our, the other team, trying to not do any of that stuff, but trying to do it in a more personal way. And then just, connecting with real people in real places and real situations. So, having some success doing that, and definitely very intentional about doing it going forward.
Mm. Ramsey, as we come closer to the end of the podcast, I'm curious, is there something we haven't touched on? Is there a question I probably should have asked you that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share any information on?
I feel like we've really kind of covered all the bases. Yeah. I have a central sort of hub for my life online through my website, what'sworthwhile.net. And, got a lot of products out there, and just am really excited about telling my story. Really glad that I had the chance to do that, and just reaching out as much as I can.
Yeah, nice, Ramsey. Thanks for that. The dream. Where's the future? What's the vision? Where would you like to be in the next 5 years from now, Ramsey?
I'd like to be back in the middle, back in the thick of it, feeling again like I'm making a difference. I have all this like sort of nascent leadership. The best times of my life are ones where I have been in a leadership role, and I hope and look forward to getting back into a leadership role. And, it doesn't mean that it's anything big. It doesn't mean that there are, it's not about having ridiculous number of followers or people. It's just within a core group, working within a core group, and being again at the center of something. I feel like I've been on the outskirts, but am getting back towards the middle. And I want to, in these next 5 years, I want to grow into the role of being coach and mentor. If I look back over the course of my life and my career, there are lots of people who played that role of coach or mentor for me. And they always helped me learn and understand things. They opened doors for me. And I want very much to transition into a role where I can play that role for other people, especially for guys who are, maybe 10, 20 years younger than me who are coming up. And, that's where I feel like I can be of use.
Stepping into the archetype of the king, mate, with more leadership in a sense. And it's
Yes.
sharing that wisdom from the journey that you've had and the struggles that you've had along the way. And I think that's a calling for many of us when we sort of get to that midlife transition or that second chapter is not maybe what I can get, but what can I give? And it sounds like you've got a lot to give, mate. And, you're definitely passionate about what you're doing. So I wish you all the success as you work towards that dream. My only question to finish off on is like you talk about the leadership roles and you talk about wanting to be able to help people. So I'm just curious, like when you're in that position, what's the emotion that you feel?
Um, Maybe it's not an emotion, but I feel useful. I feel like I'm making an impact. I feel like I am uh, contributing to the greater good, like I'm on mission.
Mm,
And that's exciting. That gets me out of bed in the morning, and it helps me to sleep well at night.
Mm. The reason I ask, because again, I was listening to another podcast this week, and he was talking about how we set goals and how we've always got good goals, and we like to have goals that are measurable, and we're always told that goals should be measurable. It's the weight on the scales, it's the money in the bank account, it's the material things that we own. But reality is, it's like, well, how do those things make you feel? What's the emotion that's attached to having a healthy body, or the emotion that's attached to having, that car, or whatever it is that we're trying to strive for, that material thing? And could we cut out the middleman? Can we ask ourselves potentially, well, what is that emotion that I want to feel more of in my life? And what are the things I can do today without having to burn myself out or break my balls to try and get to this material thing or the metric that I'm trying to chase? But what about that emotion? What gives me that fulfillment? What gives me that joy, that excitement, that rush, that flow, whatever I'm trying to feel? And how can I create more of that in my day to day life? Looking at my calendar, looking at my schedule, looking at how I live my life. So I just thought that was an interesting thing. And as you were
Well, I
talking
think,
about leadership, I was curious to know.
yeah, well, I think what you're describing is shalom.
mm,
Shalom is a combination of peace and rightness and completion.
mm,
So it's, when we're doing the right things, when we're accomplishing what we're setting out to do, when we're working against the forces of chaos and entropy, then we start to find and approach shalom.
mm.
And that sense of peace and completeness is absolutely kind of what I would and do and want to strive for.
Mm. Shalom, where does that come from? Do you know?
It's from Judaism. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. There you go. Yeah, I'm wondering maybe there's probably a lot of terms in a lot of different languages or a lot of different times that it probably represents something like that. So appreciate you sharing that. Ramsey, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah. Uh, Find me at my website, what'sworthwhile.net. And I also am on social media on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and X. So yeah, absolutely. Get in touch with me. I'd love to hear back from you. I'd love to hear your comments on podcast episodes and any of the other things that I'm putting out there.
Awesome, Ramsey. Thank you again for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And I wish you all the best with this new venture you're on. There's one thing this conversation makes clear. It's this. Midlife isn't a crisis. It's not a time to settle or a time to accept decline. What's happening in midlife is often feedback. Your body, your energy, your sense of purpose and meaning. Those who wake up start by asking better questions. And the real work doesn't come from pushing harder. It's about listening with honesty. If this episode resonates, this is exactly the kind of conversations we continue inside the Midlife Mavericks Brotherhood. Men doing the work without all the bullshit, without pretending. You can join the Brotherhood today, free. The link is in the show notes. Before we go, I'd like to invite you to sit with these questions. What is your body asking you to pay more attention to right now? Where are you pushing when you might need to realign? And what would change in midlife look like if you stopped expecting decline and started focusing on growth? Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.